Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our August 18th, 2025 edition of Week to Week, the political roundtable from the Commonwealth Club World Affairs. If you've got a cell phone, please silence it or turn it off. So a friend of mine recently let me know that the No Agenda podcast praised the Commonwealth Club podcast. They like the speakers. They said they're more honest than what they see on MSNBC or Fox or CNN. I was like, sounds great. And then they specifically pointed out something that was on the last Week to Week program. And I was like, that is really cool. I was very happy with that. Because I figure, thank you. You might not agree with everything you hear up here. You might not agree with anything you hear up here tonight. But hopefully you'll come away with some information, some data, some facts about the issues that just kind of make you think a little bit more about them and understand what's going on. So I don't care what podcast you host. I'm glad you're here, and welcome everyone, whether you're in the room or listening or watching online. Now let's meet our panelists for today. On the, I guess, stage left, or audience right, in more ways than one, is Tim Anaya.
Yes, that's a good one.
Tim Anaya is the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Pacific Research Institute. He's also the co-author of the California Left Coast Survivor's Guide. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you.
And in the middle is Melissa Kane. She's an attorney, political journalist, and an OG week-to-week panelist. So welcome back.
Hi, family.
You all know what we do here. We've got some question cards spread throughout the room. If you have a question, write it down. Our volunteers will pick them up and pass them on to me. And as always, earlier during the hour is better, just because it gives me more time to work it into the conversation. So let's go into the Wayback Machine to 1812. Massachusetts, I remember it well. Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry became the namesake for gerrymandering, which was the term created after the state's election districts were redrawn under his watch. Now, the governor apparently hated the practice of gerrymandering. I'm sure he didn't like the title either once it was attached to him. But nonetheless, the practice and the title has survived for centuries, literally, and by both parties. Elbridge Gerry, by the way, later became vice president under President James Madison. Now, a different American president, Donald Trump, has brought the term back into the headlines. He called up the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, and said, I need you to find me 11,780 more votes. No, wait. That was a different election. Different state. Okay. This time he called up Abbott and said, Republicans, what was his exact wording? It was something like, we deserve, or something like that, 5 more votes. And you can get them, 5 more House seats. And you can get them for us. So Abbott, being the staunch states' rights individualist that he is, immediately said, yes, sir, and called a special session of his state legislature, and all hell broke loose. So Democrats left, and they went to Chicago, where they enjoyed some delicious deep dish pizza. But as you'll see, yes, there have been developments lately, and we're going to talk about what's going on with them, why this is all happening, whether in the end it'll even matter, and let's just tell me to shut up and talk to the people who actually know what's going on. So let's where do we start with?
I was going to say, it's a hard one to dive into.
Well, let's start with Texas.
Okay.
Texas has the right to do this legally, right? Mm-hmm. Governor Abbott can call the session. They can vote in, they can...
And also, I mean, look, the president did have conversations, it seems it's been reported, but also the Department of Justice did send a letter in early June saying these districts are now not compliant with a recent court case, basically redefined a whole bunch of the Voting Rights Act law. And based on that recent court case, you need to redistrict these 4 districts. And so when they did that, the maps that they came up with affected 5 districts. So that's how we end up at 5. So I do want to point out there is a DOJ. I'm sure he wasn't sad to get the letter, but I'm just saying there was a DOJ imperative saying this is no longer lawful. And it does mean that potentially if they weren't to do any redistricting, there could be legal challenges on the other side of this as well. So they did have to do something, it appears.
And there are going to be legal challenges no matter what happens in every state that this comes up in. which is going to be fun because, we have more week to weeks coming up. We have to talk about stuff. Tim, The Democrats, as our audience pointed out, fled the state.
Yep.
What did that accomplish? Or what were they trying to accomplish, do you think?
Well, they're trying to, in Texas, you have to have, I don't know the exact number. Is it 2/3? You have to have a certain number of members to have a quorum. In California, it's 41 votes, but in Texas, it's 2/3. So when you have more than a third of the vote, well, you have a little power. And so that's one thing that they could do is kind of sneak out of the state. There have been conspiracy theories on this whole issue, too, that, Texas is a wild state for its politics in many ways, not just this issue that we have here. The Republicans have a very large majority in the legislature, yet they've spent the last year fighting with one another over school choice has been the primary issue. The governor of Texas supported, I think it was 11 or 12 primary challengers to sitting members of the Texas legislature in the last election. Most of them won. Wow. So they're very divided, and it used to be kind of a tradition, right, of when you would elect a speaker. It was actually a rather bipartisan thing. Sometimes even not a member of the majority party wasn't elected as speaker. So the Republican who's elected the speaker of the Texas House is actually the candidate preferred by the Democratic members of the Texas House. Have I lost you yet? What kind of the conspiracy theory, right, is while he's out there saying we're going to redistrict and we're going to do all of this, well, he could have called a vote on the day when they were all there. But he adjourned for the weekend and for 4 days, and that let the Democratic members sneak out of the state. So that's a little bit of a conspiracy theory that, well, maybe wink, wink, okay, I'll see you on Monday.
Wow. Well, and the special sessions last for, this is a special session, so it lasts for 30 days. And so the idea was we're going to go hang out, eat pizza. We're going to wait out the 30 days and, I don't know, maybe never go home. I don't know what the long-term plan was. But essentially what happened is at the end of the 30 days, which was, I think, Friday, the governor just called a new emergency session. And so the 30-day clock starts again. So ultimately, they have to come back. There will be a quorum, and as soon as there is, you just need a majority vote to pass the maps. And so it will be legally challenged all day long, but I think the thing will get enacted.
And if you were smart about it, so there's the 30-day sessions. Texas files, their filing deadline for next year's elections is sometime in December, I believe. They have an earlier primary. Well, you theoretically could have just hung out in Illinois for, assuming you could have afforded it financially, enough could have hung out in Illinois or wherever they were at until, well, you can send an agent to collect your papers and do all of that to file for re-election. But you theoretically could have hung out until after the filing deadline had passed, right?
Well, now that they're back too, anybody who wants to leave the chambers has to be escorted by a sheriff, like a deputy.
And they have to get a pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're on lockdown now that they're
And
back.
technically, that's how it is. Like here in the California legislature, when you hear them in session, if you watch, I don't recommend it, but if you do watch, you'll hear, the quorum call is in place, and that means they have to stay on the floor, and you'll see members go up to the speaker's dais and they get a little paper. That's literally them getting their pass to leave the chambers.
I have to go to the bathroom? That sort of
Yes. Well, there is a bathroom off the assembly chamber, so they don't have to do that.
thing? Well, that's either good or bad. Yeah. The story does not end there, however, because everything is national these days. And besides Governor J.B. Pritzker of Illinois jumping in and defending his new guests from Texas, Gavin Newsom started making some very bold pronouncements in all caps on Twitter, and he declared that California, in response to Texas, was going to redo its maps. So, stage is set. Melissa, I know you think this is all the most brilliant, clean government that's going on. This is like working like clockwork efficiency. But what's going on here, and just what might be the problems with this?
I don't know where to begin. This is.
She did bring charts.
I did bring charts. I did bring charts.
Yeah.
I was hoping in the other room you can put stuff on the thing, but So I was just trying to check to see. Look, we only have 9 Republicans in our House delegation, our congressional delegation. We have 9 Republicans out of 52. We only have 9 to sacrifice at the altar of Gavin 2028. I don't think we're going to be able to fix the whole problem. But I did a little, and I hope you guys can see this, and I apologize for like my totally lame graphics here. But I was looking at the Texas voters versus their congressional delegation. Like, how are people represented there? And I don't know, it's a little hinky there because when you register to vote in Texas, God love Texas, you don't actually declare a party. You just, when you vote in a primary, that's your declaration. You can just change it every year or whatever. So the data's a little hinky, but what we think is that Democrats are 47%. That's that big black piece right here. This is the Democrats in Texas, we think. And this is the Democrats in the congressional delegation. There are 13 of them out of 40 Democrats, right? So they're about, what do we say here? There's 33% are Democrats. So we have 46% in the population, 33% here. That's a 176% ratio for the GOP, right? And so, something's weird is happening here. But hold my beer, because California, we have similar number of Democrats, around 46%. We have 25% registered Republicans. And as you can see, this is what our House makeup looks like. We have 52 members. 43 are Democrats, 9 are Republicans. So 17% of our congressional delegation represents 25% of our population. And again, 46% Democrats. Now we have about 86% representation. So our ratio is 187% Democrat. And so we are, not really ones to point fingers, I think, at some point. And just to put them side by side a little bit, this is sort of the Texas is a little more diverse, you might say, than our state. If we were to give up the 5, like let's say all this plays out and they make 5 Republican seats and we make 5 Democrat seats, then we will be down to 4 Republicans, or 8% of our congressional delegation, and Democrats will constitute 92% of our delegation. So what we're being asked to do is really squeeze blood from that stone here in California.
And what's amazing here is, as you know, California does not have the legislature in normal existences do the maps anymore. It's done by this redistricting commission, Prop 20. Some of you voted for or against it back when it was done. We ended up with a more gerrymandered map than Texas with an independent commission.
It's not good enough.
It's kind of like, well, where could you go from there? Tim?
It's an interesting, I was around as a staffer during the last time we did it the old way, which was politicians drawing the line. So this would be the 2001 redistricting. And that was interesting because I remember as a staffer, there was this little office that was above an Indian restaurant, and you had to go up this little weird rickety staircase.
It
and you
probably
go
smelled
in.
so good.
And I talked to the fellow who was our redistricting consultant the other day, and he said, I love Indian food until I spent a year working above this restaurant. And now I don't ever want to see it again. But and we would go in and we would see the fancy computers of the day. And they'd go and say, okay, here's your boss's district, and they're talking about taking this tract out and putting this tract in, and you'd get version after version. And that redistricting, it ended up being Democrats and Republicans cut a deal, and it was an incumbent protection plan. So it preserved the makeup in Congress and in both houses of the legislature at what it was at that time. And there were 3 toss-up seats, and it just so worked out that Republicans won all 3 of those seats for most of that decade, and then in 2008, the Democrats won all of those seats. In 2011, when we went to the redistricting commission, and remember, the redistricting commission it's 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 others, so third parties or nonpartisan voters. The state auditor, it's a very officious process. You put in your application, the state auditor weeds through all of it, and you can't be like well, maybe if I don't do anything for a decade, I always thought I would be a good member of the redistricting commission. Wouldn't that be
I
fun?
would nominate you. I think you'd be great.
I think it'd be fun, but you can't have like worked in politics for a certain number of years. There's a whole bunch of things, and then it gets more. The legislative leaders, like in a court case, picking a jury, they can strike certain numbers of the commissioners. So you end up with this commission, and it takes them about a year. And they go through the census, they go through a ton of public hearings. You actually, as citizens or citizens groups can come in and say, I live in this neighborhood and we want to keep our district together, and here's our map, and here's what we would propose for our assembly district. They do that all over the state. It's a lot of work. And so the reason why Republicans didn't fare so well, even though in general it's been a pretty good deal for Republicans. You now see the alternative with this map proposed today is that they haven't been organized. We now have the process. You have to go through the process. You got to organize yourselves. You got to have your own maps. You got to have people show up at the hearings, which the Democrats do very well. So the Black Caucus would come in with their maps and have, folks who support those maps come to the hearings and testify. And the API caucus would come in and down the line, right? And other community groups and different interests would come in and do that. So the 2011 redistricting, really had a very hands-off. At 2020, that round, COVID kind of messed things up a little bit. It was delayed. It was very hard to actually get the commissioners in 2020, in that 2020 round. So I hear oh, thank you. So it's it's fascinating to see now that we see this. And when I hear Donald Trump talk about, well, California is gerrymandered against Republicans, well, now you see the alternative. This is why an independent redistricting commission isn't such a bad thing if you're a Republican, or in any state, if you're a member of the minority party, because we've seen it this decade. Republicans have gained seats this decade. In the last election, Republicans lost seats. When you have, a chance, you can win or lose. One last thing that was interesting, in 2012, I was visiting a friend of mine who worked with him in the legislature. He lived in Columbus, Ohio at the time. He worked in politics. And this was during the 2012 campaign, and they were going through, in Ohio, we got invited to this Republican strategy meeting where all the important people were going to go and strategize the elections. And then we got to go hang out with, at the time, Governor Kasich afterwards at the governor's mansion. So I remember going in there and sitting and listening to all of this, and every big person you could think of, Senator Rob Portman, who was almost vice president, and various members of Congress you would remember. And I remember the main thing they talked about that day was Democrats in Ohio were pursuing an independent redistricting commission just like Arnold Schwarzenegger did in California, and we have to fight that tooth and nail. And I just sort of sat there, bemused, listening to the whole thing. But it reinforces the point. Independent redistricting commissions, if done right, that's how the minority party in that particular state has a chance to fairly compete.
Well, interestingly, in Texas, I was looking at the agenda to see what was happening during this special session. And one of the other things on the agenda is a proposal by Democrats in Texas to have their own independent redistricting commission that looks a lot like ours, but we are being asked to toss ours in their name. Anyway, it is something that is appealing for folks who want something a little more fair. I don't know if y'all remember. So 2008, presidential year. Also, this is when we passed the commission for this state stuff, right? It's the state Senate, state assembly, Board of Equalization. So we're not a Congress yet. So by the way, 2008 also when we endorsed high-speed rail. So we're going to have do-overs. I'd love to have that one back on the November ballot as well. But anyway, so 2 years later, 2010, there are 2 ballot measures on the ballot. One expands the commission to Congress, and 2 gets rid of the commission altogether. All right, so now we've had 3 ballot measures, and every time, who is against this commission? It's the Democratic Party, right? It is public employee unions. It's the Sierra Club. Forgive me for saying the boogeyman's name, but it's George Soros. Like, if you look at the contributors to the anti-commission part, Democrats have always hated this, and I think they are not sad to have an opportunity to claw some of this back. I also think that there is no way that if we give up some of this power for just temporarily, that we're going to get it back. Like, there is no way. It'll be 2030 and there'll be another, JD Vance is doing something. So we got to, it will be something. They aren't going to give it back. They have always hated this commission. And that is why I was so happy to vote for it. And I was a registered Democrat at the time. And I was like, still, I don't think we have a problem with too much Democratic power in the state of California. With too little Democratic power in the state of California. I think it's okay. And I think when the voters revisited it in 2010 for the expansion, it passed 60-40. Right? The original one was 51-49, squeaker. But when came time to expand, 60-40 in favor of the commission. Polls show voters like this. Polls show voters don't like politicians. And it's all a matter of who do you think that the enemy is. And it was something that Arnold Schwarzenegger said recently. This is from the Houston Chronicle. He said, it's not a battle between Democrats and Republicans. This is a battle between politicians and the people. And I'm going with the people. And I think that really encapsulates kind of the different perspectives. Like, is Trump the enemy, or is this partisan gerrymandering stuff, sort of keeping people from being represented fairly, the enemy? And I think that's going to be the thing. And I don't know how it's going to play out. It's not polling well.
And to Melissa's point, if you game it out for 2030, right? If we, go through this and we theoretically go back to independent redistricting, what you're looking at, if you draw the seats fairly, remember, it's not just we're drawing them fairly, it's also the census, right? So you're going to have population shifts. You have people moving in and out of California. It's growth within California. And so if you go in 2030, 2031, do you think whoever Hakeem Jeffries or whoever the Democratic leader is in Washington is going to sit back and say, you know what? We gave our word back in 2025, and we are just going to sit by and start out this decade losing 7 to 10 seats in Congress. No way. They're going to do exactly what Melissa says. They're going to find a ruse to put on the ballot, to either repeal it altogether or have some other, let's suspend it for a decade. The other thing on the issue of the politicians really want this. Friday afternoon, now only good news comes out late on a Friday afternoon. The maps were finally released. Everybody was waiting. Where are the maps? Where are the maps? Let's have the maps. Now, you might think the maps were released from in a bill. Assembly Elections Committee introduced the bill. Speaker of the Assembly before the map. Even the governor put forward that. No. The proposal came out directly from the Democratic Campaign Committee in Washington, D.C. Literally said, here are our maps. We commend them for your consideration. Thank you very much. If that doesn't say it all, I don't know what does.
If that doesn't say good government, what will?
Yes.
I was wondering how they got those maps so fast.
Yes.
They were sitting in somebody's dream book in Washington, D.C., just waiting to send them out. Well, the other thing, too, is as soon as Gavin Newsom makes the announcement, I'll have California do this like we're a bunch of sheep. I immediately get a fundraising text saying, come join me in the fight against Trump. Oh, okay. All right. So now we have Melissa's chocolate ice cream ballot measure, right? It's Melissa's chocolate ice cream. I mean, it's about the chocolate ice cream, but my name is next to it and my mug is on every billboard about the chocolate ice cream initiative. Now, I'm just going to text you and I'm going to ask you to give me your contact information. So I'm going to put that in my Melissa database, even though it's for chocolate ice cream. I'm going to ask you to give me a little bit of money too, because for the chocolate ice cream initiative, I don't have to report that and spend that like I do for a regular candidate fund, right? It's my chocolate ice cream fund. But at the end of all of this, whether we beat Big Vanilla or not, I have your contact information. I've gotten some money from you, and everybody knows me as the fighter for chocolate ice cream. And that is part of the play. It's a big part of the play. I don't think they were, just like I don't think the Republicans were sad to get that directive to redistrict. I don't think that Gavin Newsom and the Democrats with the ready-made maps were sad to have this opportunity to jump in and get some name recognition, get some supporter data, and raise some money outside of the FEC and federal candidate reporting.
And isn't it unlimited money you can raise in the ballot measure committee?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can also pay unlimited, not even if it's not the official committee, if it's just, hey, Tim's pro chocolate ice cream committee,
right.
you can
I love
do
it.
that as, in secret as well. So there's all kinds of good, reasons why it makes a lot of sense if you want to be president in 2028, that why you would want to raise your profile, gather some information, try to put together an army of supporters. And I'm not saying he doesn't genuinely also want this. I just mean, I think that this kind of works out for everybody.
On that point, of Newsom, it's a big gamble that he's making. Even though he's on television every day and having this wonderful, just for the data mining alone is a great exercise. But, if you think of, kind of where he's gone this year, and I kind of write about this in my book, he wants what the voters want across the country. So earlier this year, right, he thought, well, I can hang out with the bros, and I like guns, and I can drink beer too, and I'm a moderate, see, and I'm not a wacky guy. And then he went to South Carolina, and he discovered, that's not what the base voters want. They want a fighter. So we saw it a little bit in June with all the stuff with ICE in Los Angeles, and now this has been, whether he was lying in wait or really took advantage of it very quickly. So now you're all in. You're promising you're the savior of the Democrats of America, and if you want to defeat Trump, vote stand with me. Well, what happens, which is, a real possibility that this goes down in flames. Are his presidential ambitions over before they began? Is it a major hit? Because the issue is this, then you see, and this is the knock on Gavin Newsom, right? He talks a good fight. He's up there. No one does a check presentation better than Gavin Newsom, right? Has that. He should sell them those jackets with the California bear on them. No one picks up trash better on television than Gavin Newsom. Well, now you've had a major national fight that you've summoned Democrats of America to rally behind. And if you don't succeed, what does that say about your ability to fight and deliver on the issues Democrats across America really care about?
Well, and already I said the polling is out and it doesn't look like this is very popular. So the conventional wisdom is if you're going to have a ballot measure, that it needs to start being about 60% favorable, essentially, because you're going to, as the campaign goes on, as you get some opposition, your numbers are going to go down. So you should start with at least like a 60% sort of, wind behind your back. And so far the polls show anywhere from 30% to I think 51% was their opening poll. So it's already going to be facing an uphill battle, although I think, again, a lot of money is going to be going into this. There'll be a lot of attention to it. But the other thing, too, is now other Republican states, this is to your point, other Republican states have said, we're going to, if you do this, if we get into an arms race, we'll do it too, and we can do it easier because we don't have commissions. We don't need the voters to allow us to do this. We have reserved the right. Dave Wasserman from the Cook Political Report said this: Democrats face far more procedural hurdles in the states that they control because voters in blue states have embraced so-called good government reforms, like commissions. We have one, New York has one, several states have them. More good government reforms than those in red states. Even Democrats were able to counter gains made by Republicans in Texas, the net result from a redistricting arms race nationwide would be an increased Republican advantage. So for what? And I'm not, there may be a good, sort of moral underpinning to the cause, but if you start doing this, again, we only got 9, and we're looking at 5 other states. I think New York is going to try, but they're going to have some similar hurdles, but it's already pretty unpopular and might not actually be a thing that flips the House, for example.
And right back to where I started, which we're saying no matter what happens with this in any of these states, there are going to be lawsuits. How long could lawsuits gum up the process? How does this affect the voting? What maps are used while this is going through the courts? What are we looking at, Tim?
Well, if you look at across the country, there have been some, not certainly they didn't get the attention that this battle is getting, but there have been redistricting fights. Alabama has had one that they've been going over in recent years. North Carolina's had some. Texas has had some in past redistricting. So you can sue under the Voting Rights Act. And so the attorney in the Department of Justice who would oversee the filing of such a lawsuit is our own Harmeet Dillon, who was major Republican figure here in California. And you can bet she's going to file those lawsuits the day after these lines are approved. Now, there's also some state issues, right? We had a court ruling in the 1980s about can California do mid-decade redistricting. California Supreme Court ruled no, you can't. There was a ballot measure then that was thrown off the ballot. This one, because it's a constitutional amendment, there's a lot. They're thinking that, well, A, that ruling happened a long time ago, so who knows what this current makeup of the court would say, but also B, they may have inoculated some of the state legal issues in how they've written the legislation. The legislation only came out this morning, so they're still poring over that. But the biggest thing is the delay. So, okay, if a lawsuit's filed in November, well, it's not going to be dismissed overnight. It takes a while to go through the process. There's appeals, and the filing process for the 2026 election starts in December. And you have to finish the filing. I think it's late February or early March when you finish the filing.
And you kind of have to know what district you're filing
You have to know what district you're filing for.
So you know where you live.
Right. So courts in the other states have said, well, while we're adjudicating this dispute over redistricting, the old maps will be in play for that election. So we could endure a $200 million ugly campaign, all for naught.
Gavin 2028.
Yes.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on this. A couple more things before we move on. Arnold Schwarzenegger has geared up and, like everyone does, went to social media to say he's in whatever, I forget his words, but he's basically in training to do the gerrymandering fight. Does he? You worked with him. Does he have sway anymore? I mean, he was a moderate Republican in a what's now a very progressive Democratic state and a more conservative, arguably, Republican Party.
Well, I'm biased, of course, but Arnold, if you look back, Melissa may remember this from back in the day, there was a ballot measure shortly after Arnold became governor in 2004 that dealt with 3 strikes. And it wasn't getting the attention that he thought it should. And so 15 days before the election, it was 2/3 yes, 1/3 no. Arnold got involved in the campaign, cut a TV ad. Within 15 days, he turned that around and defeated the initiative. So I've seen Arnold do it before. The other thing I would say is Arnold, when he left office, was probably at the ebb of his popularity. All the things with the Esteban Nunez pardon and the divorce and all of that. I don't know that Arnold is at the peak of his Terminator popularity today, but I'd say he is pretty high up there, and because he has been a national crusader on it, he has the street cred on it. If it's an Arnold versus Gavin fight, I would say look out, Gavin.
You agree?
I think if Arnold Schwarzenegger ran again, I know he can't, but if he were to run again for governor, he would immediately be the front runner. I think he's still very popular. People remember him fondly, and he has been bipartisan in this. He has said, look, what Texas is doing is wrong. What California is considering doing is wrong, and has been pretty consistent. Like I said, sort of people versus politicians, which I think is a really powerful message in this moment.
Has Jerry Brown opined on this? Has anyone
tracked him down on his farm?
Okay. Well, let's move this into a related area, which is the 2026 midterms. I mean, forget everything. Well, actually, you don't need to forget everything we just now talked about with gerrymandering, because it literally might not matter if it's all tied up in courts and we're using the old maps everywhere. But conventional wisdom had been Democrats were probably looking at picking up the House. I mean, a couple seats and they're there. And midterms generally often are, rejection of the party that's in power. Has anything changed the conventional wisdom? Was the conventional wisdom wrong? What are you expecting? Just big picture in terms of, let's just talk about the two houses of Congress in 2026.
Well, I mean, the president's party always is at a disadvantage, especially the 6-year itch, as they call it. I think, the sun rises or sets on, is the economy good? Is inflation under control? Is there peace and prosperity? Are people happy? If Cheerios cost less than they do today, well, that might be a good thing for Republican candidates. The House is tough, and it is such a narrow margin. I don't know. I will say, when you look at past waves, if it is a wave, look at 2006, look at 2010, 2014, 2018, you could have supposedly safe seats, and a wave crushes over incumbents we weren't even thinking about were in trouble in that election. So if things are going bad, all this talk about lines may not really matter. I would say this as interesting, and maybe a wrinkle for this is that, the president's involved. Obviously, it's a referendum on the president when you have this sort of thing. But usually the president is just out there. He helps, the candidates of his or her party raise money, right? And maybe they're in TV ads. Donald Trump is going all in to reelect a Republican majority to the tune of, I believe he's already raised $200 million in his own committee, which is unprecedented for a president and that amount of giving, because he knows the House has, number one, the power of the purse, and number two, impeachment proceedings begin in the House. And then, of course, all the things about subpoenas and all of that.
Is it in Bitcoin?
That's a good question. I don't know the conversion rate or how that would be. So, I would say today, Democrats are certainly favored in the House. The Senate's a more favorable map to Republicans. But again, if you have a wave, even senators you're not talking about, all of a sudden the last 10 days of the election can be sweating. So if it's a pretty even election, Republicans will win the Senate. But if it's a wave for Democrats, yeah, I'd worry about the Senate.
I think one thing to keep an eye on is the fundraising for Democrats. As you all know, after this last election cycle, a number of big-time fundraisers for Democrats said, no more. We're going to sit out for a little bit. We're not going to give you any more money for a little while. And so it's unclear if they're still going to be funding the down ballot races, what that's going to look like in congressional races, especially when the president's raising so much money on one hand, and Democrats are feeling and some Democrat fundraisers are feeling a little skittish on the other hand. Does that result in less of a wave or sort of a reversal of the conventional wisdom? I think the two that I'm looking at are Susan Collins of Maine, because she's up for re-election. I'm always just kind of fascinated by her. I'm just amazed that she survives election after election. And also just because I'm from Georgia, and I think it was fascinating that a Democrat won the Senate race there, these 5 years ago or so. Ossoff is running for re-election, and he, like everybody in Georgia, is running against him. And so that's going to be, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out, but that's a seat that's very, to your point, the Senate is a little more favorable to Republicans. 6 years ago, there were several seats that were flipped from Republican to Democrat that are very easy, not easy, but seem very on edge to be flipped back. So Republicans could definitely pick up some of those seats.
The other thing on the fundraising too that's interesting to watch when you read these articles at home. So there's what the president and the party leaders raise, and that's important. but it's what the incumbents are raising in their campaign accounts, because they get better rates for television advertising. And one of the reasons why I would argue Republicans did so badly in 2018 is because all those incumbents were fat and happy, and they didn't do a very good job at raising money in their own campaign accounts. And so when you had like Steve Knight, who was a congressman at the time from Palmdale, he wasn't a great fundraiser to begin with. I like him very much, but he wasn't a great fundraiser. When Michael Bloomberg spent $10 million against him in the last like 72 hours of the race. Well, how do you combat that? You can't. So this time what you're seeing is Republican incumbents are doing a much better job of raising money in these competitive seats, and Democratic challengers aren't doing as good a job at raising money. So Republicans this time, money may be a big thing in favor of the Republicans, even though it's could be a Democratic wave year.
I did see a headline this morning about money problems at the Democratic National Convention, so that wouldn't bode well for them. Melissa mentioned Susan Collins and John Ossoff. Any particular races you think are either interesting or bellwethers?
I would watch the North Carolina Senate race. North Carolina has had a lot of marquee, close gubernatorial and Senate races over really more than the past decade, and presidential as well. Republicans have won most of them. And so this year they have the former governor who just left office.
Roy Cooper?
Roy Cooper agreed. He didn't want to be a senator, but it's amazing when party leaders come and promise you all these things. Washington sounds pretty good. So he announced he's running. And Tom Tillis, who's the Republican incumbent, who I would have bet money on him to be reelected, he announced during the whole One Big Beautiful Bill debate, hey, I don't like a lot of these things. You can't get at me. I'm going to retire. That's how I'm going to deal with all of your threats. And so the former chairman of the Republican National Committee has been anointed as the Republican candidate. It seems Republicans have coalesced behind that candidate. Now, the question is, this is a guy who isn't a household name there. He's starting out in the initial polls. He's about 9 to 10 points down. So that's going to be, to me, a test of, okay, is our strength enough to get a guy? Now he's going to have $100 million probably behind him. But is our strength enough to beat a governor? And there has been a history in recent years of Democrats nominating popular governors for U.S. Senate seats, and virtually all of them have lost.
Why?
I think it's because they have a record. Oh. Right? They have 8 years of
you don't want
signings
that.
and vetoes, right?
Well, I mean, my thought when we were talking about the gerrymandering was that even if you set these new lines the way that you think are going to, you have all these other factors that come into play. One of them, and this is, I think, a situation where the Republicans have shot themselves in the foot numerous times, has been nominating some very terrible candidates who get, well, I mean, was it North Carolina, the governor who
Yes.
got involved in a porn and Nazi scam? I mean, you couldn't make this. I mean, it would be a South Park episode. But so, you can always have a safe seat that still flips because one or the other party nominates a crackpot.
That's true. It is all local. I mean, I don't know if y'all saw the video. There was the Democrat candidate for governor in South Carolina who got arrested, and there's this he's naked from the waist up. That's all I saw. And he's in the back of a police car just drunk and railing about plaintiffs' lawyers. And it was just wild.
I think he's going to win.
I know. It was a campaign
It's the South,
commercial. But it was just like, great job, guys. Like,
I
picked a good one there.
I think another thing on the governors, too, is there are a lot of Republican governors who have thrived in Democratic states and vice versa. Larry Hogan, for example, governor of Maryland, was one of those, and he ran for the Senate last year, and you'd think, that's a very formidable candidate. He should win a U.S. Senate seat even in Maryland. But I think voters like that sort of thing. We like kind of a check or someone who's, untraditional as a governor. But they go back to more of their partisan lean when that untraditional figure is running for the Senate. And I want someone who's going to be, a red vote or a blue vote, regardless of whether I like you as an individual governor or not.
Okay, so we're talking about races. We're talking about the next elections. Gavin Newsom, as we know, is going to be looking for something else to do after this term. Kamala Harris, we know, is not going to try to succeed him in office. Not yet, at least. Got stuff to do. That's put that down the line. Is there some way that we could end up with a Republican? And if so, who do you think it would be?
Don't act like you haven't dreamt about this.
I'm not running. Don't. But I would announce here if I was going to run. Well, I'm more curious. Who of these people is going to break out of the pack? My friend Morgan has a good line for something like this, and I think you could describe this current gubernatorial field as a who's who of who's that. And there really is no one who's breaking. I mean, you had a sitting lieutenant governor whose father is one of the wealthiest people in California, had every advantage, didn't even try to run a TV ad or do anything, and just says, I'm out. And now she's going to run for state treasurer. Now, the question about a Republican, would a Republican make the top two? Yeah. And I think the polls we've seen, Steve Hilton seems to be consolidating the Republican vote. And I think, when we talk about, Donald Trump got 40% of the vote in California. So there's enough Republicans, if you have at least one strong candidate who consolidates the vote, they should make the top two. I would say, of the, that doesn't mean that, Steve I think he'll run a very credible race. He's already running a credible race, but you still start out the general election as such a huge disadvantage. The one I would watch, who would probably be the closest thing to this, is I would watch Rick Caruso. Rick Caruso is a businessman. He almost won the mayorship of Los Angeles. He's one of the most successful developers in Los Angeles. He is now a Democrat, and he's been very critical of Karen Bass and what she's been doing in Los Angeles. He's a kind of a practical problem solver. I think you would.
Oh, well, he'll never win.
No, he'll never win. But you have a field of 6 or 7 people who aren't going anywhere. Someone like that, hey, you just got to get to 12 or 15 and you make it. And he also is one of the wealthiest people in California. So I'd keep my eye on him. He'd be an interesting governor. I don't know if he has a chance at all. And obviously when you get into this, the knives will be out if he goes for governor. But that's who I'd keep my eye on.
With the top two, this is how it works, right? The Democratic Party figures out who they're going to coalesce behind, and we don't totally know who that is yet. I don't. The deadline to file is, I think, March of next year, so we have some time. I don't know if a hero is going to jump into the race, somebody really exciting, but because right now it's just, but they'll find somebody, and then what they will do is they will find the Republican, the other person, or Caruso, who they don't want to run against. Right, that they want to run against, and they will puff that person up. So they'll make sure that it's not, Gavin and Villaraigosa. They'll make sure it's Gavin and John Cox. Right, they're gonna they puffed up John. They spent a lot of money being like, John Cox is the choice of Donald Trump, and to make sure that Republicans were voting for him and that he'd be the guy, because they thought they could beat him. They knew they could beat him. So that's what our process sort of results in is the party in power is going to pick the person that they think they can beat. They're going to raise that person's profile. And so I don't think Rick Caruso has a chance, because what they would do is if they thought he could win, they would puff up Steve Hilton and make sure he's the other guy. A Republican is on the ballot because they know they can beat that person, not another Democrat. That's why you never see, even though we've got this runoff system, you never see 2 Democrats running for a statewide office because the party makes sure that there's a Republican with really good name recognition that's going to be our opponent, not somebody who's legit and could potentially actually draw any votes.
Though he does have $100 million, so that does help in trying to combat that effort. But
That is true.
I'm curious to see, looking at everybody running, I'm curious how Katie Porter fares, because you could call her Senate campaign, well, it was not very successful. You might argue it was a bit of a disaster, actually. She has a large following, but it seems like it's online following, it's Twitter following. Does it translate into votes? And so right now she's kind of, I would say, a paper front runner. She's first in the little polling that we've seen. I feel like she's going to be eclipsed when, inevitably someone's going to catch fire.
So y'all remember in the Senate race, she was not the preferred candidate by the party. The party wanted Adam Schiff. They made sure Adam Schiff was the one. And she wrote many, many mean things about the Democratic Party. So I don't think they're going to be interested in supporting her. The most recent poll from earlier this month is from Emerson, and it showed 40% undecided, 18% for Porter, and 12% for Hilton. Those were our two sort of folks at the top. I think part of the issue is Caruso hasn't decided, maybe, if correct me if I'm wrong, hasn't decided if he's running or not. He might run for mayor of LA again. A lot of people not happy with Karen Bass right now in the Pacific Palisades area. So he might run for that again, or governor. We're not really sure. So he hasn't really done much. His name might be higher on the list once he makes a decision. But so far, that's where we are, and I think the party might be reluctant to support Katie Porter given the history there.
Okay, audience question. What about Sherrod Brown, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, who's running to try to reclaim his Senate seat? Does he have a good chance, or is that...
Raise a lot of money, spend a lot of money. I guess I would believe it when I see it. But that's one of those, he won in a wave in 2006. The issue is the senator who was appointed. So remember, the election would be for J.D. Vance's old Senate seat. And the governor, Governor DeWine, appointed the lieutenant governor. And so he's a more moderate candidate, a more electable candidate. But apparently the reviews have been he hasn't... hit the ground running, so to speak. He hasn't lit the world on fire. There's questions of, is he doing the work that he needs to do? I think now probably he's been told you better do the work or you're not going to be a senator come next November. I still think Ohio has trended so red. I don't see any difference that it's trending the other way enough. It'll be a closer than usual race. Remember last year, people didn't really believe he was going to lose until the very end. And even on election night, it was kind of, people weren't really counting that one as they were going to lose. It was a bit of a surprise that he lost. And he lost pretty handily. I think it was 5 points. So, yeah, I might, lose a 4 or 5 point race. But right now, I don't think he's favored by any stretch of the imagination. I would just say he is about as good a candidate as you could recruit. But again, if you were just thrown out of office 2 years ago, all that same record, all that same baggage is still there.
Yeah. Question, almost an inevitable question, which is, okay, Kamala's not going to run for governor. Is 2028 an obvious? I mean, does everyone assume, raise your hand, do you think she's running in 2028 for president? Really? I would have expected more people to say yes. What do you think? What's she going to do?
Well, she can't fundraise. You spent $1 billion. No one's giving you any more money. Sorry, no. And I think that's a legit part of the problem. What is she going to? Well, she's not going to go to the private sector. Let's just say that. Probably speaking circuit, she'll probably get an agent, a fancy agent, and get paid lots of money to go talk to corporate retreats, and things like that. So you could see, that kind of activity, maybe being a pundit, being like a media personality. But I think at least for now, no. Maybe after people have forgotten. and it's more of a happy, distant memory. And you go, yeah, whatever happened to Kamala? And then you say, okay, come on back. But at least right now it's just a little too soon. And I think there's a lot of other really good candidates, I think, that are looking at 2028.
Okay.
I still think the Kamala Harris show, she could be the top person on daytime television if she went after
Would you
it.
watch that?
Well,
See?
I mean,
See?
it could be entertaining, right? I'm more curious to see how her book does, and if anyone's interested in reading the book and the construct of the book of, was it 107 Days is the name of it? Does everybody want to relive that day by day? Now, I enjoy a book like that, so I would read a book like that. But I do think in her mind, I think she thinks she's going to run for president again. I think that was the real thing of why she wasn't running.
For governor?
Yeah.
Oh, I think she saw
in her
some polls.
And also, too, the knock on Kamala Harris, right, was, she takes too long to make a decision. She overanalyzes things. She shies from making a tough decision. Well, if you didn't really want to be governor, or you were just kind of ticking a box, or, hey, that's a place to hang my hat for 2 years, you actually have to be in Sacramento to be the governor. And I think I mentioned before, during her time as Attorney General, now, I get invited to things and I'm around. I've never seen her in person once. And I've seen every other, you name them. I've been at dozens of events with them. If not, I've talked to them. I don't ever remember seeing her in person once. So, got to hang out in Sacramento a little bit if you want to be governor too. But I believe she does want to run for president. I don't know that anyone else wants that.
I'm like,
but
so do I, but that's.
Okay. Question. I don't know if you saw the Dave Eggers article in the SF Chronicle about California seceding and becoming its own country. That would be a way for Gavin Newsom to stay in office. That's my only thinking.
I didn't see the article, but that's not a thing.
Legally, they can't, right? You
No, they can't. Texas tried. Thanks, Texas. Texas did try once before, and the Supreme Court said no. America is Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. No, I don't know. You can't leave, right? Basically, this is it. Also, people always forget. You think you can just leave? Okay. It's like a divorce, right? Like there's debt, there's property. Like what happens to the U.S. government? Forts and other federal property. What happens to all the debt that the people here owe? Like you would have to take, we're 40 million people. We're, whatever it is, like 12, 13, to 20% of the population. However, is everyone going to write a check to get out of this relationship? To atone for the debt that that we represent for the federal government? That would be so much more complicated than people think in terms of we can just have the Civil War is different, right? But back then things were a lot simpler. The federal government didn't do much back then. There weren't a lot of kind of entanglements, and even then it was complicated. But now it's even more complicated. The amount of money we would have to pay, the amount of entanglements, the amount of property problems, even if it were legal and all the other states said, fine, get out, and we will vote to allow you to leave the union. Even if they did that, it would still be way more complicated than I think people realize.
I think a good analogy on the global scale is look at Brexit. And look at all of what the UK and the European Union has been going through. And I still don't think they've settled everything despite the UK has finally left the European Union. And it's all over basically money.
Yeah. And it did come down to I can't speak. It did come down to a lot of exactly that thing. Debt, owed amounts of these payments that you are either going to pay or you're not going to pay. Yeah. Okay. So, final topic, I guess briefly before we get to the news quiz. The Trump administration took over the police department and such in Washington, D.C. First of all, legally he can do this, correct or not?
Okay. I did the research for you fine people here at the Commonwealth Club. I read the 115-page 1973 Home Rule Act for the District of Columbia. This is how much I care. Section 740 of the Home Rule Act. So basically, again, D.C. is the property of the U.S. government. It is run by the U.S. government. In 1973, the U.S. government gave DC some power to do some municipal type stuff. That's the Home Rule Act. But to be clear, the federal government always retains control and retains the ability to yank back any of those powers. But by federal government, I mean the legislature, not the president.
Really?
Here's the part. So the legislature can pass laws saying, and in fact, I'll give you an example. There was a law that was proposed. I think it's still being considered, but it was proposed by a Republican that would repeal DC's sanctuary law, because that is a thing that the legislature can do. Can say, DC, we don't like this. We're going to make you stop doing that. Okay, so back to the president. All right, so if the president of the United States determines that special conditions of an emergency nature exist which require the use of the Metropolitan Police Force for federal purposes, he may direct the mayor to provide him, and the mayor shall provide, such services of the Metropolitan Police Force as the president may deem necessary and appropriate. So it does not say the president is now the chief of police. It says the president can ask for stuff from the police department, and the police department has to provide the services. And that is what a federal judge in Washington, D.C. held basically during a hearing, because of course, immediately lawsuit, right. And said, look, you can ask the police for stuff, but you don't get to go in and say, and like give the hat to Pam Bondi and like, okay, that's not how this works. This does allow you to do some stuff. And also there is a 30-day limit on this. If the U.S. houses do not pass a resolution extending the time period for this, it will expire in 30 days. So for what it's worth, it expires in 30 days. So right now, that's why you had, initially it was like Pam Bondi's a police chief and we're going to, do all of these things. But now then the judge was like, no, that's not what this says. It says they have to do stuff for you, not that you become the police chief. And so they issued a new set of rules saying now we're going to be very specific. I'm sorry, the Trump administration, Pam Bondi's office, issued a new set of rules saying what we are requiring is that you suspend your sanctuary city rules. You have to comply with what we ask of you when it comes to undocumented folks and you communicating with us about people's status and hearing dates and things like that. So that's why it's been pulled back, because the judge said that's not what the law requires. But there is a provision that says you can demand and get services from the police for 30 days. That is all. And that is why we're like in the situation where we're in, where they've acknowledged that the police are still the police and they report through their regular, sort of reporting structure. It's just that they are going to be required to communicate about immigration.
Tim, final word.
I think the political response to this has been very interesting to watch, because you've seen a lot of, well, look at the crime data. The numbers don't justify, sending all this in. And it's a very interesting question, because as we know, crime is in the eye of the beholder. You can have the greatest crime rates, but if, you walk out on your front porch in the morning and you get shot in the face, things aren't so secure, right? But one of the things that's interesting, and this is something that we've covered when talking about crime rates in California, is a lot of law enforcement agencies do not release data at all, even though they are supposed to by law. But as if you read, there's a great series of articles in the San Francisco Chronicle from last summer. Some agencies like the Oakland Police Department totally cook the books and release, the most unreliable data to show whatever they're doing in a good light. And they're not alone. Other police departments across the country do that. So, on crime, a common reframe is, well, the numbers show we're having record low, all of this. But crime is really about how you feel. And all of us, when we've gone to Washington, D.C., yeah, we probably didn't get mugged, but I bet we probably didn't feel super safe walking around either. So there's kind of a there as part of, hey, we want the community to feel safe. Do you need to send the National Guard in? Well, that's a whole nother question of, is that the right way to address it?
Well, and they keep saying, and I'm always a little frustrated when it's like crime is down. It's like, yes, from what? To what? If you have 1 million murders a year and you get it down to 500,000, 50% reduction. everything's fine, right? Well, no, it's still pretty unacceptable. So just beware whenever you see people saying things like, "Oh, crime is down." What the hell's that mean? Like home prices in the Bay Area are down. Oh, really? From ludicrous to completely insane? Like, what are the, you know what I mean? Like, it's a matter of context, and so it's important to keep asking those questions when you see people, getting in debates like this. And also, one of the commissioners in Washington D.C. is suspended for cooking the books because his police officer said, yeah, we go to a thing that was like a violent robbery, and he'd say, oh, just say it's petty theft. You write it up like that so that the numbers are incorrect, and he actually was recently suspended. So it was definitely happening, at least in some parts of DC.
And there is a lot of crime isn't reported in the first place. So that's a challenge. That's not necessarily cooking the books, but that's a challenge across all crime data.
On that happy note, we've come to the end of our program. I want to thank Tim and I, Melissa Kane, and thanks to all of you for being here. We're going to be back here on September 17th. Hope to see you then. In the meantime, take care.